Few people have had as much influence on modern psychology as Carl Jung. He coined terms such as extraversion and introversion, archetypes, anima and animus, shadow, and collective unconscious, among others. He was a practicing psychiatrist and is regarded as the founder of analytical psychology or Jungian analysis. In his early years, he came into contact with Sigmund Freud, the founder of Psychoanalysis. They had a close relationship and collaborated on a joint vision of human psychology. However, they parted ways as Jung's personal research on analytical psychology, and especially his discovery of the collective unconscious, made it impossible for him to follow Freud's psychoanalysis. This resulted in a painful schism after years of collaboration. Jung's analytical psychology essentially gave birth to the empirical science of the psyche, which culminated in his magnum opus, The Collected Works, written over a period of 60 years during his lifetime. Jung distinguishes our psyche into three different realms: consciousness, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. Consciousness is composed of our field of awareness, all the experiences we are aware of. This is where we form our ego. However, according to Jung, it is dwarfed in relation to the unconscious. The personal unconscious is particular to each individual and is made of parts unique to our own lives, thoughts we are unaware of, have forgotten, or have repressed due to their disturbing nature. On the other hand, the collective unconscious is the deepest part of our unconscious, genetically inherited and not shaped by personal experience. This is where the archetypes are found. Archetypes represent universal patterns and images that are part of the collective unconscious. Jung believed that we inherit these archetypes just as we inherit instinctive patterns of behavior. That we inherit these archetypes just as we inherit instinctive patterns of behavior. Jung was also an expert in the study of religious and mythological symbology. His work in both fields led to the discovery of the archetypes. The study of these myths revealed similar patterns across cultures. He even found the same symbols in the dreams of patients suffering from schizophrenia, which reinforced the idea of archetypes and the collective unconscious. Apart from his travels in the United States and England, Jung traveled to East Africa to learn about natives who had never been in contact with European culture. He also traveled to India, where he felt himself under the direct influence of a foreign culture for the first time. Hinduism played an important role in his understanding of symbolism and the unconscious. Although Jung suggested a series of archetypes, such as the father, the mother, the wise old man, the hero, and the trickster, we will focus on what are regarded as the four major Jungian archetypes: the self, the persona, the shadow, and the anima animus. The first archetype is the self. To understand the self, we need to know how it differs from the ego, which is part of the realm of consciousness. Jung considers the self to be superior in rank to the ego. The ego is acquired during an individual's lifetime and is therefore a conscious factor. In theory, you could completely describe the ego, but this would only amount to the conscious personality and not the total picture, which would have to include unconscious parts. The ego is composed of the somatic and the psychic factors. The somatic is the physical self, our body, while the psychic relates to our inner self, our mind. Both the somatic and the psychic have conscious and unconscious aspects. The ego's main characteristic is our individuality, which is part of our consciousness. However, it is only one part of the personality, not the whole of it. The remaining part is composed of the unconscious. The sum. of the conscious and unconscious is what Jung calls the self, which makes up the total personality of an individual. To achieve the self, Jung's central concept revolved around what he called individuation or self-realization. A lifelong process of distinguishing the self out of each individual's conscious and unconscious elements. He believed this to be the main goal of human psychological development. Now we delve into what Jung considered the most important part of ourselves, the unconscious. Here's where we encounter the persona, the shadow, and the anima animus, which have the most disturbing influence on the ego. The persona. The persona is known as the conformity archetype. It is an element of the personality which arises for reasons of adaptation or personal convenience. If you have certain masks you put on in various situations, that is a persona. In essence, it conceals our real self, presenting ourselves as someone different from who we really are. As we please other people with our persona, it leaves our negative traits that contradict our real selves, forming our shadow. The shadow. Jung stated the shadow to be the unknown dark side of the personality. Whereas the contents of the personal unconscious are acquired during an individual's lifetime, the contents of the collective unconscious are invariably archetypes that were present from the beginning. Among the shadow, the anima, and the animus, the most accessible and easiest to experience is the shadow, since it can be retrieved from the contents of the personal unconscious. To be conscious of the shadow, there must be considerable moral effort, recognizing the dark aspects of one's personality as real and present. While some traits of one's own shadow can be recognized, some offer greater resistance to moral control and prove almost impossible to influence. An individual who does not recognize his psychological projection, a defense mechanism in which the individual defends himself against unconscious impulses by denying their existence in himself while attributing them to others, will eventually create an illusory environment whereby he changes the world into the replica of his own unknown face. The shadow plays an important role in balancing the overall psyche. A weak adaptation of the shadow results in a low level of personality whereby the individual behaves like a passive victim of his shadow, extremely worried about the opinions of others, a walking persona. People who do not look at their shadows directly project them onto others. The qualities we often cannot stand in others are the ones we have in ourselves and wish not to see. To truly grow as a person, one must integrate the shadow and balance it with the persona. It is possible for man to recognize the relative evil of his nature, but it is rare for him to gaze into the face of absolute evil. An encounter with your shadow may appear in dreams, typically as a person of the same sex as you. It depends on the living experience of each individual, rather than being inherited in the collective unconscious. The dissolution of the persona and understanding one's own shadow is a central part of the process of individuation. In the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it must be Jekyll, the conscious personality, who integrates the shadow, and not the other way around. Otherwise, you become the slave of your autonomous shadow. The integration of the shadow marks the first stage of the analytic process. Without it, a recognition of the anima and animus is impossible. However, acknowledgement of the shadow must be a continuous process throughout one's life. Anima and animus. Within the shadow, there exist two contrasexual figures, the anima and the animus. In every man's psyche, there is an unconscious feminine aspect called the anima, which is a personification of all feminine psychological tendencies. In every woman's psyche, there is an unconscious masculine aspect called the animus. Unlike the shadow, which represents The personal unconscious and can be made conscious. The anima and animus are much further away from consciousness and are seldom realized. Man's anima is characterized by the feminine eros. It is passive, like a child seeking the protecting and nourishing circle of the mother. Woman's animus corresponds to the paternal logos, the principle of rationality. When man integrates the anima, it becomes eros, giving way to a more caring figure. When woman integrates the animus, it becomes logos, giving her a capacity for assertiveness and deliberation. The anima appears in dreams, visions, and fantasies, taking on a personified form. She is a spontaneous product of the unconscious and not a substitute figure for the mother, and she is present in every man. There are thoughts, feelings, and affects alive in us which we would never have believed possible. This seems like utter fantasy to anyone who has not yet experienced it for themselves, for a normal person knows what he thinks. The recognition of the anima gives rise to a triad: the masculine subject, the feminine subject, and the transcendent anima. With a woman, it gives rise to the transcendent animus. The continuous integration of the contents of the collective unconscious, making them part of the self through psychotherapy, introspection, and having the moral fortitude to change one's own beliefs, can have a considerable influence on ourselves, giving us a much more solid foundation in our psyche, helping us overcome our daily struggles, and making us much more aware of who we truly are, and that there are elements in our psyche beyond our control.